It started like any other Monday with the same rush of coffee, emails, and deadlines. But I had no idea that this day would change the trajectory of my career and my trust in people I had once respected. I had always been the type to pour myself into my work, to stay late, to obsess over details, and to ensure that every project I touched reflected my creativity, precision, and dedication. I believed in doing good work, not for recognition, but for the satisfaction of knowing it was done right. Yet, as it turns out, excellence can be a double-edged sword, especially when those around you are not what they seem. For years, I had worked under my boss, Robert, a man whose charm and confidence made him an admired figure in the company. From the very beginning, I respected him. He had a reputation for leadership, for turning mediocre projects into market successes, and for recognizing talent, or at least that's what I thought. Our relationship had always been professional, cordial, and respectful, though I often noticed subtle signs of competitiveness, how he would casually remark on ideas he claimed as his own in meetings, or how he would redirect attention away from others' contributions with a simple, persuasive smile. At the time, I chalked it up to ambition. Who doesn't want to succeed in a corporate environment? My position wasn't minor by any means. I was the creative strategist on a crucial project for our company, tasked with designing a campaign that could redefine our brand and bring in significant revenue. I had spent months brainstorming, researching, drafting, and refining ideas. The project was more than just work. It was my chance to demonstrate my skills, to leave a lasting impression, and perhaps to finally receive the recognition I had long deserved. Everything seemed to be progressing smoothly. I collaborated with colleagues who shared my passion and dedication. Late nights were filled with whiteboard scribbles, creative arguments, and iterative designs. We laughed, we vented, and we celebrated small milestones. It was a team effort, yes, but I knew that the core idea, the spark that made the project exceptional, had been mine. Every insight, every innovative twist, every strategic recommendation had originated from me. Then came the first warning signs, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Robert started scheduling private meetings with senior management, always ensuring I wasn't present. Occasionally, he would comment vaguely about strategy adjustments or optimizing project presentation, but without giving details. Emails that I had drafted suddenly disappeared from shared folders or were reworded and sent under his name. A sinking feeling began to grow in the pit of my stomach, a suspicion I tried to dismiss as paranoia, a product of overwork and stress. Colleagues whispered in hallways, exchanging glances I didn't understand. "Did you see how Robert presented the preliminary report last week?" One asked. It sounded different from what we discussed. Another colleague said nothing, but the way their eyes shifted when they saw me gave me chills. Something was happening, and I was only beginning to see the outlines of the storm that was approaching. It wasn't until the first official presentation that the magnitude of the betrayal became clear. We had spent weeks perfecting a proposal, an idea I had nurtured from inception to near perfection. I had imagined standing in that boardroom, presenting my work with confidence, watching the executives nod in appreciation, but reality hit like a punch to the stomach. Robert walked in, flanked by a few of our colleagues, and launched into the presentation I had spent countless nights perfecting. The slides, the structure, the innovative strategies, they were all there, but the words were his. The tone, the examples, the credit, it all belonged to him now. My hands shook as I sat frozen, a mix of disbelief, shock, and a growing fire of anger building inside me. How could he do this? How could someone take what I had created, my intellectual property, my effort, and present it as his own? The executives applauded, laughed, nodded in admiration, and Robert smiled, basking in the glory of a triumph that was not his. He made jokes about the team's effort, careful to avoid mentioning the hours, the nights, the creativity that had been mine. I wanted to speak up, to stand and claim what was rightfully mine, but a wave of hesitation washed over me. Would they believe me? Would I risk looking petty, jealous, or vindictive? My mind raced as my heart pounded. For a moment, I felt powerless. But deep inside, beneath the hurt and humiliation, a spark ignited. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He had underestimated me, assumed that silence, submission, or fear would keep me from acting. He had no idea that beneath the surface, I was already planning not impulsive revenge, but a strategy grounded in patience, evidence, and the undeniable truth that the work was mine. Over the next few days, I observed Robert closely. He continued to bask in praise, oblivious or perhaps arrogant in thinking he had pulled the perfect theft. Meanwhile, I quietly documented everything: emails, draft versions, timestamps, witnesses who had been present during brainstorming sessions, and colleagues who knew the origins of every idea, every interaction, every presentation. Every subtle acknowledgement of my work became part of a carefully constructed record. Colleagues began to notice subtle changes in my behavior. I stopped discussing ideas freely in meetings, preferring private channels where I could maintain control over documentation. I started backing up drafts, sending copies to trusted allies within the company, and marking every innovation with a clear digital signature. My anger had transformed into focus, and that focus became my weapon. In private moments, I replayed the humiliation over and over in my mind. The laughter, the nodding heads, the smug smile of someone who believed he had outsmarted me. It fueled my determination. Betrayal is a strange emotion, one that blends hurt, disbelief, and righteous anger into a force that demands action. I realized that the key wasn't to act impulsively, but to plan carefully, to let the evidence speak louder than emotion, and to ensure that the eventual confrontation would be undeniable. I also reflected on my values. I had never sought revenge for the sake of revenge. I believed in integrity, in fairness, and in being recognized for merit, not manipulation. But integrity doesn't mean passivity. Sometimes protecting oneself and one's contributions requires courage, patience, and a meticulous strategy, and that is exactly what I began to cultivate. The next weeks were a delicate dance. Robert continued to parade my ideas as his own, unaware that I was quietly preparing a countermeasure. I gathered drafts with clear timestamps, saved emails that traced every suggestion I had made, and even collected testimonies from colleagues who had been present in early brainstorming sessions. Every piece of evidence was carefully labeled, cross-referenced, and stored in multiple secure locations. Meanwhile, I studied Robert's behavior, predicting his moves, anticipating how he would present the project next, and mapping out the perfect opportunity to expose the truth. This wasn't just about reclaiming credit, it was about demonstrating that deceit and arrogance cannot go unchecked. It was about asserting that hard work, honesty, and integrity still matter in a world that often rewards selfish ambition. Evenings became my planning time. I reviewed the collected evidence, rehearsed potential scenarios, and imagined the exact moment when the truth would finally surface. I thought about the presentation where he would be publicly confronted, the moment when colleagues would realize the deception, and the feeling of finally reclaiming what was mine. The anticipation was electric, a mix of anxiety, excitement, and steely determination. At home, I couldn't share much with friends or family, fearing that word might reach Robert. The secrecy added to the intensity, heightening the suspense of the unfolding plan. I found myself reflecting not only on the professional betrayal, but on the human side of it, how someone I had trusted, who had held a position of authority and respect, could so casually dismiss my contributions, claim them as his own, and laugh in the face of the truth. It was both infuriating and illuminating. As the act closed, I sat at my desk late one night, staring at the glowing screen filled with evidence, plans, and drafts. The fire of betrayal still burned, but it had been transformed into a careful, calculated resolve. The confrontation would come, but it would be on my terms, meticulously planned and undeniable. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Those who think they can steal your work, your recognition, and your worth underestimate the power of patience, preparation, and unwavering integrity. This was the beginning not of revenge born from impulse, but of a strategic, emotionally intelligent plan that would not only reclaim what was mine, but would also expose the truth, teach a lesson, and restore justice in a world where deceit had briefly seemed victorious. Robert thought he had won, but he had no idea what I had in store. The days after the initial presentation were tense, heavy with a quiet unease that seemed to hang over the office. What I had once thought was a minor misstep or a misunderstanding had now begun to reveal itself as something far more deliberate. I could feel it in the subtle changes in behavior, the unexplained absences, and the way Robert carried himself as though he had won something monumental. But I wasn't powerless. I was watching, listening, and piecing together a puzzle that he thought I would ignore. It started with small discrepancies. Emails I had written were being forwarded with edits I had never authorized. Meeting notes I had drafted were reworded as if to remove my fingerprints from the work entirely. Even project timelines were being subtly altered, making it seem like contributions had come from him or from other team members. I tried to shrug it off at first, telling myself it was likely administrative oversight. But then came the little signs that I could no longer ignore: the whispered comments from colleagues, the odd timing of private meetings, and the occasional glance from Robert that carried a knowing, almost taunting look. One afternoon, I walked past his office to see him closing the door on a colleague mid-discussion. I paused, catching fragments of the conversation. "Don't worry, the presentation tomorrow will be perfect. We'll get all the credit, just leave it to me." My heart sank. The casual arrogance, the way he framed it, as if it were a shared success, made it clear he was claiming ownership of my work and counting on everyone else to accept it. I began to notice patterns. Robert had always been competitive, but now his behavior suggested calculation and secrecy. He would avoid any conversation that could trace ideas back to me. He would answer questions vaguely, redirecting attention away from my contributions, and he frequently sent me updates about team strategy, without context, almost daring me to question him. The sense of unease grew with each passing day. Then there were the unexplained documents. Drafts I knew existed in our shared project folder had gone missing. Emails had been deleted or altered. Even digital timestamps seemed inconsistent. At first, I blamed technology or administrative errors, but slowly, the truth became undeniable. Someone was deliberately covering tracks. My gut, which had been whispering doubts for weeks, now screamed at me. Robert wasn't just taking credit. He was orchestrating a complete erasure of my role. Colleagues began to notice too. Some were sympathetic, offering cautious comments like, "I thought you worked on this, isn't that what we discussed in the brainstorm?" Others avoided eye contact, hesitant to get involved. Their silence was as telling as any admission. Fear, loyalty, or self-preservation, they all played into Robert's scheme, leaving me isolated in a subtle, invisible war. I spent late nights analyzing every detail, comparing timestamps, reading through drafts, cross-referencing emails, and documenting every conversation that hinted at my contributions. I became obsessed with patterns, which meetings he had scheduled, which documents he had edited, who had been present during critical discussions. Each discovery added fuel to my determination. I wasn't just angry, I was gathering ammunition. Every piece of evidence, every trace of deception was being meticulously cataloged. Flashbacks began to haunt me. Small incidents from previous months, once easily dismissed, now made sense. The time he suggested improvements that were my original ideas, the subtle ways he would credit other colleagues for sections he knew I had created, the often comments about how some people just aren't ready for leadership while I presented my work in meetings. The realization hit me hard. This pattern of behavior had been building for months, carefully camouflaged beneath his charm and authority. I also noticed his manipulation of our team dynamics. He would praise contributions in public that were minor or tangential, while downplaying the central work that was undeniably mine. He created a narrative that painted him as the visionary leader, a master strategist, while everyone else, including me, was simply executing his directives. The audacity was staggering, and it ignited a complex mix of fear, anger, and determination inside me. One pivotal moment made everything crystal clear. A colleague, someone I trusted, accidentally forwarded an email thread to me that had been meant for Robert. In it, he outlined how he intended to present the project as his idea to senior management, explicitly discussing which of my contributions he would claim and how to frame it so that no one could question the source. My heart raced as I read the words. There it was, the blueprint of betrayal, undeniable proof that this was not accidental nor a misunderstanding. I felt a wave of betrayal unlike anything I had ever experienced. Anger surged, threatening to cloud my judgment. For a brief moment, I imagined storming into his office, confronting him with raw emotion, but I knew better. Acting impulsively would not only risk my career, but also diminish the clarity and power of the justice I intended to achieve. If I wanted to reclaim what was mine, I had to be strategic, patient, and methodical. So I began planning quietly. Every document, every email, every witness who could verify my work became part of a growing archive. I created backups, stored evidence in secure locations, and made detailed notes about every instance where Robert attempted to claim credit. I also began cultivating allies discreetly, colleagues who had observed his behavior and could confirm my contributions if the situation ever required it. Trust, I realized, would be essential in this next stage. Emotionally, the betrayal cut deep. This was someone I had respected, someone in a position of authority I had once admired. The arrogance of thinking he could steal my ideas, claim them as his own, and laugh in my face was infuriating. But beneath the anger, I felt a sense of clarity. He had underestimated me. He believed I was powerless, that I would allow his theft to go unchallenged, and that miscalculation would be his undoing. I also had to navigate the emotional minefield of my doubt. Was I overreacting? Was this all in my imagination? Each day, each piece of evidence, and each interaction with Robert reinforced the truth. This was deliberate, calculated, and unethical. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that action was necessary, not impulsive retaliation, but a deliberate, carefully orchestrated plan to expose the truth and reclaim my rightful recognition. By the end of the week, I had a full map of his tactics. The missing drafts, the altered emails, the strategic misdirection in meetings, all of it pointed to one conclusion. Robert had been actively working to erase my contributions and claim the credit for himself. It was audacious, it was infuriating, and it demanded a response. But this was not yet the confrontation. This was the simmering phase, the build-up before the storm. I had to bide my time, gather proof, and prepare for the moment when the trap would be set. Acting too early would give him a chance to cover tracks. Acting too late would risk losing control of the situation entirely. Timing, I realized, was as critical as evidence. In private reflection, I also considered the psychological dimension of the plan. Robert thrived on arrogance, on the belief that he could manipulate, intimidate, and control outcomes. By remaining calm, methodical, and meticulous, I could turn his confidence into his weakness. The key was to expose him publicly, where the undeniable evidence would speak louder than any charm, argument, or manipulation he could muster. As the act closed, the tension had reached a boiling point. The betrayal was no longer a subtle unease. It was a concrete reality, meticulously documented and undeniable. I had moved from shock and disbelief into calculated determination. Robert may have thought he had won, but the stage was being set for his unraveling, and I was ready to play the long game, to wait for the precise moment when his arrogance and deception would meet the force of truth, evidence, and justice. The simmering tension, the meticulous planning, and the quiet observation had transformed my anger into a weapon. This wasn't about revenge born of emotion. It was about justice, recognition, and reclaiming the credit that had been stolen. Robert's overconfidence, his assumption that I would remain silent, and his disregard for ethics were about to collide with a calculated response that he would never see coming. It was a Friday afternoon when the reality of Robert's betrayal hit me with the force of a hurricane. I had spent the week quietly gathering evidence, carefully documenting each instance where my contributions had been claimed as his own. I thought I had prepared myself emotionally, that I could face the truth with measured resolve, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment when the scale of his deception became undeniable. I had just returned from a client meeting, feeling satisfied with the progress my team had made. I opened my email and noticed a calendar invite for a meeting I hadn't been informed about. A presentation to senior executives led by Robert. A sinking feeling immediately gripped me. Something was off. My instincts, haunted by days of observation and suspicion, screamed at me that this wasn't routine. I clicked through the attachments attached to the invite, and my heart froze. There it was, my work. Every slide, every strategy, every innovative idea presented under Robert's name, polished and prepared as if he had conceived it himself. The effort I had poured into late nights, weekends, and meticulous planning had been stolen. The proof was undeniable. The betrayal was laid bare in black and white. My hands trembled, and a lump formed in my throat. For a moment, I felt the weight of disbelief, the heavy fog of shock that numbed all other thoughts. I thought back to every interaction, every meeting, every casual conversation where he had subtly undermined me or redirected credit. Each memory is now aligned perfectly with the evidence in front of me. The patterns were clear. This was not accidental, nor was it a miscommunication. This was deliberate theft, a calculated attempt to erase my role and present my intellectual property as his own. The emotional impact was immediate and intense. Rage, humiliation, grief, and disbelief all collided within me. I wanted to confront him immediately, to shout, to demand an explanation, but I knew that would serve no purpose. It would only play into his hands, give him a chance to manipulate the narrative further. No, this required strategy, evidence, allies, precision. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside me, and began planning the next steps. I opened the folders where I had saved drafts and earlier versions of the project, comparing timestamps, noting subtle changes, and documenting every single edit that Robert had made. Each alteration, each rewording, each deletion of my original input was now a weapon in the arsenal I was quietly assembling. I realized that while he had stolen the presentation, he had left a trail of breadcrumbs, digital fingerprints, dated drafts, and witness accounts that could prove the work was mine. The first step was internal. I had to be certain. Leaving no room for doubt, I revisited email chains, notes, and messages with colleagues who had been involved in brainstorming sessions. I cross-checked files, verified timestamps, and even checked metadata on documents to confirm the authorship of my contributions. Every piece of evidence reinforced the truth that Robert had systematically appropriated my work. Then came the psychological realization. This wasn't just about stolen credit, it was about control, ego, and power. Robert had laughed in my face, confident in his ability to manipulate perception. He had assumed I was powerless, that I would remain silent, and that I realized would be his ultimate mistake. His arrogance and overconfidence blinded him to the fact that I was preparing to fight back, not recklessly, but strategically. Colleagues began to notice subtle changes in my behavior. I no longer shared ideas freely in meetings. I started keeping private logs, sending drafts to trusted allies, and securing evidence that could not be disputed. Conversations became more guarded, and I began observing Robert even more closely, noting patterns of manipulation, moments of overconfidence, and opportunities where his strategy could be exposed. One pivotal moment confirmed everything. A senior executive casually mentioned in passing, "Robert's presentation was impressive, though I remember some of those ideas coming from your draft last month." The words were spoken lightly, almost dismissively, but they hit me like lightning. Here was external validation that my work had been noticed, that my contributions had been recorded elsewhere, and that Robert's theft was not absolute. It was the spark I needed. I realized that if I acted correctly with precision and evidence, I could reclaim what was mine and expose him without compromising my credibility. I also began piecing together the full extent of Robert's deception. Not only had he stolen the main project, but he had attempted to manipulate colleagues, redirect attention, and subtly undermine anyone who might speak up on my behalf. Each act, when considered alone, might have seemed minor or accidental, but collectively, they formed a clear picture of intentional betrayal. The pattern was undeniable, and it ignited a mixture of righteous anger and calculated determination inside me. At home that evening, I reviewed every detail with meticulous care. I organized screenshots, emails, drafts, and timestamps into a coherent narrative. I documented witness statements, noting exactly who had seen which version of the project at what time. I even drafted a hypothetical scenario for confrontation, outlining each piece of evidence and the order in which it should be presented. I knew that timing and sequence would be critical to ensuring that the exposure would be undeniable and public. Emotionally, it was exhausting. Betrayal has a way of infiltrating every thought, every interaction, and every moment of self-reflection. I replayed every meeting, every conversation, and every presentation in my mind. I felt the sting of humiliation, the frustration of seeing my work paraded as someone else's, and the bitter taste of injustice. But beneath the raw emotion, there was a growing clarity, a precise focus on what needed to be done. The discovery also forced me to confront my values. I had always believed in integrity, in earning recognition through effort and merit. I had never sought revenge for its own sake. But in this moment, I realized that standing by silently would compromise those values. Allowing theft to go unchallenged would not only diminish my achievements, but also undermine the ethical standards I had lived by. I needed to act not impulsively, but deliberately, strategically, and ethically. Over the next few days, I began testing the waters. I subtly inquired with colleagues about their recollection of who contributed specific ideas. I kept meticulous notes on their responses, noting inconsistencies, corroborations, and potential allies. I also observed Robert's behavior closely, noting his overconfidence and the ways he subtly sought to control perception. Each observation reinforced my resolve. The confrontation, when it came, had to be flawless, irrefutable, and public. The emotional intensity of the discovery also brought unexpected clarity. Anger, while initially overwhelming, became a source of energy rather than a hindrance. Shock transformed into determination. Humiliation morphed into strategic focus. Every emotion, every thought, every moment of reflection contributed to the growing plan, a plan that would not only reclaim credit for my work, but also expose Robert's arrogance, manipulation, and unethical behavior. In private, I began rehearsing the confrontation, visualizing how evidence would be presented, how colleagues might react, and how to maintain composure under pressure. I knew that a single misstep could allow Robert to deflect blame, manipulate perception, or undermine my credibility. Precision, timing, and calm determination would be my greatest allies. By the end of the week, the full picture had emerged. Robert's theft was not an isolated incident. It was a carefully orchestrated effort designed to erase my contributions, manipulate perception, and assert dominance. But now, and with every piece of evidence documented, every witness identified, and every plan rehearsed, I felt a sense of empowerment I had never experienced before. I had discovered the betrayal, mapped its scope, and prepared for the response that would restore justice, recognition, and accountability. The act closes with a mixture of anticipation and determination. I knew that the next steps would be critical: the confrontation, the exposure, and the reclamation of what was mine. Robert thought he had won. He believed that arrogance, charm, and manipulation had secured him victory. But he had no idea that every stolen credit, every altered email, and every deceptive act had been meticulously recorded, and that the moment of reckoning was approaching. In that quiet, intense reflection, I made a vow to myself I would not allow deceit to overshadow effort, theft to go unchallenged, or arrogance to dictate outcomes. The discovery was only the beginning. The real battle, the strategic reclaiming of justice, was about to begin. And when it did, it would be undeniable, irrefutable, and unforgettable. After the discovery, the days blurred into a tense, strategic haze. I had learned the full extent of Robert's deception, and now the question loomed: how to respond in a way that would reclaim my work, restore my credibility, and ensure justice was served without risking my career or credibility in the process. The emotional toll was heavy. Anger simmered beneath the surface, grief lingered from the betrayal, and yet a clear, sharp determination began to crystallize. At first, the struggle was internal. Every fiber of my being demanded immediate action. I wanted to storm into Robert's office, confront him publicly, and demand recognition for my contribution. I imagined shouting, exposing his arrogance and manipulation in front of colleagues and executives alike. But experience, patience, and rationality reminded me that impulsive action could backfire. One wrong move, one poorly timed accusation, and Robert could turn the narrative, making me appear bitter, envious, or even unstable. I couldn't afford that, not now, not ever, so I resolved to plan strategically, meticulously. Every step needed precision, every move needed evidence, and every reaction needed anticipation. I began by organizing everything I had gathered: the drafts, emails, timestamps, notes from brainstorming sessions, and witness statements. Each item was carefully cataloged, annotated, and backed up in multiple secure locations. The evidence would speak louder than any argument, louder than emotion, and louder than Robert's charm. The next step was to identify allies. I couldn't do this alone. Workplace politics, subtle alliances, and fear of retaliation meant that the truth might not be enough unless supported by witnesses. I reached out discreetly to colleagues who had been present during key discussions or who had seen drafts evolve. Carefully, I assessed their willingness to stand with me, to corroborate my story without jeopardizing their positions. Slowly, a network of quiet supporters emerged, people who had recognized Robert's manipulations but had hesitated to act until someone with courage took the first step. Emotionally, this stage was exhausting. Every day brought reminders of the betrayal. I would see Robert presenting ideas in meetings, claiming credit for strategies I had devised, and watching colleagues nod in agreement. I felt waves of humiliation, frustration, and anger, but now these emotions were tempered by focus and clarity. I realized that my anger was a tool, not a hindrance. It fueled my planning, sharpened my attention to detail, and strengthened my resolve to act strategically rather than impulsively. I also began analyzing Robert's behavior in greater depth. Every interaction, every habit, every pattern became data to be studied. I noted the moments when he was most confident, the ways he projected authority, and the subtle cracks in his narrative. I discovered that his overconfidence was both his strength and his weakness. He assumed no one would challenge him, that his charm and authority were enough to suppress dissent. That arrogance became a cornerstone of my strategy: expose him where his confidence blinded him, use his hubris against him. Simultaneously, I had to wrestle with the psychological battle within myself. It was tempting to indulge in fantasies of immediate confrontation, of humiliation, of poetic justice. But I reminded myself that real power lay in preparation, not impulse. Every step had to be deliberate. Every piece of evidence had to be airtight. And every interaction with Robert had to be carefully orchestrated to avoid alerting him to my intentions prematurely. To reinforce my position, I began creating redundant proof of my contributions. I dug through archived emails, recovered old drafts, and even requested copies of files from IT to verify metadata. I compiled timelines, cross-referenced versions, and highlighted clear markers of authorship. Every detail mattered. The data slide was created, the email confirming an idea, even casual mentions in team chat that traced concepts back to me. The goal was to leave no room for dispute, no loophole for him to escape accountability. Mentally, I rehearsed scenarios endlessly. How would I present the evidence? In what order? Which colleagues should speak first? Which documents should be revealed? And what questions might Robert attempt to deflect? I visualized the confrontation multiple times, imagining his reactions, the potential arguments, and how to maintain composure under pressure. The rehearsal wasn't just strategic, it was emotional armor, preparing me to stay calm even as the tension reached a breaking point. There were moments of doubt, of course. I questioned whether exposing Robert would make me appear vindictive, whether I dared to follow through, and whether the risk to my career was worth the fight. But each doubt was countered by the clarity of truth. I hadn't started this battle out of spite. I was fighting for integrity, recognition, and justice. That knowledge kept me grounded, focused, and resolute. Meanwhile, Robert continued his performance, blissfully unaware of the meticulous preparation unfolding beneath the surface. He scheduled meetings, presented my ideas, and received accolades from executives who remained ignorant of the theft. I watched him carefully, noting opportunities to exploit his overconfidence, to reveal the truth at the most impactful moment. The tension was intoxicating, a slow burn that fueled my strategy with precision and purpose. I also had to plan contingencies. What if he denied everything? What if he tried to destroy evidence? What if he manipulated colleagues into supporting him? I mapped out every possibility, creating backup plans, alternative approaches, and secure channels for communication with allies. Every eventuality was considered, and every action rehearsed. The plan was becoming more than just retaliation. It was a strategic operation designed to reclaim my work, restore justice, and expose deceit without leaving room for ambiguity. Emotionally, the process was transformative. I had moved from anger and shock to clarity, focus, and empowerment. Each day of preparation, each piece of evidence cataloged, each ally discreetly secured, strengthened my resolve. I was no longer a passive victim. I was an active strategist, a person capable of turning betrayal into opportunity, humiliation into vindication, and deceit into exposure. Finally, the plan began to take shape. The confrontation would be public, undeniable, and timed perfectly. Evidence would be presented systematically. Witnesses would corroborate every claim. Robert's arrogance, his assumption of impunity would be laid bare. And when it was over, the truth would be clear to everyone. The work was mine, the credit stolen, and the betrayal exposed. But there was one final consideration: patience. The timing had to be perfect. Acting too early could allow him to cover tracks. Acting too late could risk losing momentum and clarity. I marked the optimal moment in my mind: critical company presentation, a high-stakes meeting where executives would be attentive and where exposure would have maximum impact. The trap was set, the pieces aligned, and the stage was ready. The struggle wasn't just external, it was internal, a battle between emotion and strategy, anger and patience, humiliation and empowerment. But through it all, a single truth emerged: justice, recognition, and integrity were worth every ounce of planning, every sleepless night, and every careful maneuver. I would not be silenced. I would not be dismissed. I would not allow deceit to claim victory. As Act 4 closed, I sat at my desk late one night, surrounded by meticulously organized evidence, drafted scenarios, and mental rehearsals. The fire of betrayal still burned, but it had been transformed into a disciplined, strategic force. The confrontation, when it came, would be deliberate, undeniable, and precise. Robert thought he had won. He had no idea that every stolen idea, every manipulated document, and every underestimated colleague had been accounted for. The moment of reckoning was approaching, and when it arrived, the truth would not just be revealed, it would triumph. The day had finally arrived. Months of planning, meticulous evidence gathering, and strategic rehearsals all led to this singular moment, the confrontation. The air in the office felt heavier than usual, thick with tension, as if the walls themselves were aware that a storm was about to break. I had spent the morning reviewing my evidence, rehearsing the sequence in my mind, and mentally preparing for every possible reaction from Robert. He had no idea what awaited him. The meeting was scheduled in the main conference room, a space that had witnessed countless presentations, strategy sessions, and moments of corporate theater. Today, it would witness something different: the unmasking of deceit, the reclaiming of stolen credit, and the beginning of justice. I arrived early, setting up my laptop and organizing the files I would need: emails, drafts, screenshots, and witness statements, all clearly labeled and easy to present. Every detail mattered. Robert entered the room with his usual confident swagger, the kind that had once seemed admirable to others, but now felt infuriatingly arrogant. He smiled, casually greeting everyone, completely unaware that his carefully constructed illusion was about to crumble. I could see the faintest flicker of curiosity in his eyes as he noticed my preparedness, but it was too subtle, too late. He had no idea the trap had been laid months ago, piece by piece, patiently, meticulously. The meeting began with small talk, project updates, and the usual polite exchanges. I waited for the right moment, letting him speak first, letting him bask in the illusion of control. Then, when he was midway through presenting what he believed was his project, I spoke. My voice was calm, deliberate, carrying authority that surprised even me. "Robert," I said, "before we proceed further, I'd like to clarify something regarding this project." He paused, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Of course," he replied smoothly, confident, oblivious. "Go ahead." I pulled up the first piece of evidence, a dated draft of the project created weeks before Robert had made any modifications. I displayed it on the screen, highlighting timestamps, email headers, and the specific contributions that were unmistakably mine. The room grew quiet. Colleagues shifted in their seats, some exchanging subtle glances. I could feel the weight of attention, and yet I remained calm, letting the evidence speak louder than any accusation. Robert's smirk faltered slightly, a flicker of uncertainty flashing across his face. He tried to interject, attempting to claim that the draft had been a collaborative effort, that ideas had evolved through team discussion. But I was ready. I presented email chains showing my initial proposals, versions of slides sent weeks in advance, and notes from brainstorming sessions where he had been present. The documentation was airtight, leaving no room for manipulation. The room's atmosphere shifted. Colleagues who had remained silent began nodding subtly, confirming what was being presented. Some exchanged whispers, the realization dawning that Robert had not been entirely truthful. I could see him adjusting in his chair, trying to maintain composure, trying to salvage the narrative he had built over months. But the evidence was overwhelming. Every digital fingerprint, every timestamp, every corroborating witness statement built a chain that could not be broken. Then came the moment that truly turned the tide. A trusted colleague who had been present during key brainstorming sessions spoke up. "I remember this idea," they said, voice steady, and I recall that it was Your Name who proposed it first. We discussed it extensively before Robert even added anything. The affirmation hit like thunder. One by one, others added their recollections, providing eyewitness accounts that corroborated every detail I had painstakingly documented. Robert's confidence crumbled visibly. He tried to argue, to deflect, to make it seem like the recognition was shared, but his usual charm and authority were powerless against the meticulously assembled truth. He was exposed piece by piece, his arrogance laid bare in front of the people who had once been persuaded by his performance. I watched as the narrative I had silently constructed over months unfolded flawlessly. Each piece of evidence, each witness account, and each carefully timed revelation worked in harmony, dismantling his fabricated story. I could see his frustration mounting, the panic barely contained behind a mask of composure. The man who had once laughed in my face, confident in his victory, now struggled to maintain any semblance of control. I paused, letting the tension build, letting the room absorb the weight of the revelation. Then I spoke again, my voice calm but resolute. The work presented as Robert's alone is, in fact, the result of months of my effort, creativity, and strategic input. This is not just a matter of credit, it's a matter of integrity, honesty, and accountability. My eyes met his unwavering. And now, the truth is clear to everyone here. The silence that followed was profound. Robert opened his mouth, perhaps to argue, to defend himself, but no words could undo the evidence. The truth, in all its clarity, had already spoken. I had done more than expose him. I had reclaimed control, restored integrity, and demonstrated the power of preparation, patience, and unwavering resolve. Emotionally, the confrontation was cathartic. Every moment of humiliation, anger, and doubt that had haunted me over the months transformed into empowerment. I was no longer the person who had been silently sidelined, overlooked, and undermined. I was the one who held the undeniable truth, the one who had orchestrated a flawless exposure, and the one who would emerge with both recognition and credibility intact. Colleagues began to offer support, nodding, murmuring agreements, and acknowledging the validity of the evidence. Robert's usual allies were forced to reconsider their positions, their earlier silence replaced by unease. The balance of power in the room had shifted completely. Where arrogance and deceit had once dominated, clarity, truth, and preparation now prevailed. Robert finally sat back, defeated, unable to summon the words or the composure to respond. His arrogance, which had fueled his actions for months, had become his undoing. The very traits he relied upon, confidence, charm, and control, had blinded him to the careful, methodical strategy I had employed. In under an hour, the scales had tipped entirely. The confrontation was over, but the impact lingered. I had faced betrayal head on, methodically dismantled a false narrative, and reclaimed what was mine. The experience had tested every aspect of my patient's intelligence and emotional fortitude. It had proven that justice, when pursued strategically and ethically, could overcome even the most audacious attempts at deceit. As Act 5 closes, I reflected on the magnitude of the moment. The confrontation was not about humiliation or vengeance. It was about truth, recognition, and accountability. Robert had underestimated me, overestimated his ability to manipulate, and ignored the resilience that had been quietly building beneath the surface. And now, in the clarity of the confrontation, justice had been served. The stolen work was reclaimed, integrity restored, and the lesson, unmistakable arrogance and deceit may offer temporary victories. But preparation, evidence, and unwavering resolve will always prevail in the end. The aftermath of the confrontation was immediate and profound. The air in the office felt different, charged, unsettled, and undeniably transformed. The tension that had silently festered for months had finally been released like a dam bursting, leaving everyone to confront the reality of Robert's actions. But while the confrontation exposed the truth, the next challenge was navigating the fallout, managing consequences, preserving credibility, and witnessing justice unfold. Robert's initial reaction in the hours following the exposure was a mixture of disbelief, anger, and panic. His usual calm authority had dissolved, replaced by frantic attempts to regain composure. He tried to defend himself in hushed conversations with select colleagues, hoping to salvage at least part of his reputation. But the evidence was irrefutable, meticulously documented, and supported by multiple witnesses. His words now carried no weight. Where he had once wielded confidence as a weapon, it had become his vulnerability. Senior management was the next to respond. The executive team, initially unaware of the full extent of Robert's deception, reviewed the evidence I had presented, along with corroborating accounts from colleagues. Emails, draft versions, timestamps, and witness statements painted a clear picture of intentional misconduct. The leadership's reactions were decisive. Robert was asked to provide explanations in formal settings. His credibility was immediately called into question, and internal investigations were initiated to ensure accountability and prevent recurrence. Colleagues who had been passive or silent during the months of manipulation now shifted their behavior. Many came forward to support my account, some apologizing for hesitation, others affirming the facts they had observed. The office, once divided by subtle fear and uncertainty, began to realign around transparency, accountability, and ethical conduct, there was a palpable sense of relief among those who had witnessed Robert's manipulations but had felt powerless to act. With the truth revealed, the balance of power had decisively shifted. Emotionally, the period following the confrontation was a roller coaster. Relief and validation were tempered by the lingering bitterness of betrayal. While justice had begun to take shape, I had to navigate the interpersonal fallout, strained relationships with colleagues who had hesitated, tension with management as investigations proceeded, and Robert's attempts at subtle retaliation. I remained vigilant, understanding that while the immediate confrontation had been victorious, the aftermath required continued strategy, patience, and professionalism. The formal process of justice unfolded over the following weeks. Human Resources conducted thorough investigations, reviewing project documentation, email trails, and witness statements. Robert was required to attend multiple hearings, provide explanations for discrepancies, and account for the deliberate misrepresentation of my work. The documentation I had carefully assembled became central to the proceedings, leaving no room for ambiguity or manipulation. One of the most gratifying moments came when leadership formally acknowledged my contributions. The official project reports were amended, my role highlighted, and recognition was given in meetings and internal communications. The stolen credit was officially restored, and the integrity of my work was publicly validated. This recognition was not just symbolic, it was tangible evidence that careful planning, meticulous documentation, and unwavering resolve could overcome even the most audacious attempts at deception. Robert's professional standing, however, suffered significantly. His credibility with management was eroded, colleagues became wary of him, and his influence within the organization diminished. The arrogance that had fueled his theft had now backfired spectacularly. Where he had once appeared untouchable, he now faced the consequences of his actions. While punitive measures were ultimately determined by company policy, the damage to his reputation and authority was irreversible. Beyond the immediate professional consequences, the fallout prompted reflection and discussion within the office about ethics, accountability, and workplace culture. Leadership emphasized transparency, encouraged reporting of unethical behavior, and implemented new protocols to prevent future incidents. The experience, painful as it had been, became a catalyst for positive change, fostering an environment where integrity and merit were valued above deception and manipulation. For me personally, the period following the confrontation was transformative. The months of betrayal, suspicion, and meticulous planning had taken a profound emotional toll, but they had also revealed strengths I had not fully recognized. Patience, strategic thinking, and emotional resilience had been tested under extreme pressure. I had learned to channel anger into constructive action, frustration into focused planning, and betrayal into a powerful drive for justice. The ordeal, while harrowing, had forged a deeper sense of confidence, self-worth, and professional integrity. The social dynamics of the office shifted as well. Colleagues who had once admired Robert for his apparent authority now approached him with skepticism. Those who had quietly observed my efforts began to respect not only my professional capabilities, but also my ethical fortitude. The subtle currents of office politics were reshaped by truth, transparency, and the undeniable power of carefully documented evidence. Despite the professional vindication, I also took time for personal reflection. Betrayal, I realized, leaves deep emotional scars. The humiliation, the doubt, and the anger could have consumed me had I not channeled them strategically. The experience reinforced a critical lesson: integrity and diligence are powerful tools, but they must be coupled with vigilance, preparedness, and the courage to confront wrongdoing when necessary. One particularly poignant moment occurred during a team meeting a few weeks later. The project that had been stolen and presented as Robert's was now officially recognized as my work. Senior executives praised the innovative strategies, highlighting specific contributions that had originated from my drafts and research. Colleagues who had witnessed the manipulation expressed admiration for the meticulous way I had handled the situation. The sense of justice, recognition, and closure was profound. Emotionally, there was a mixture of relief, satisfaction, and lingering sadness. Relief that the truth had prevailed, satisfaction that months of careful planning had culminated in justice, sadness for the betrayal and the need to endure such an ordeal in the first place. But ultimately, the experience reinforced resilience, self-worth, and the understanding that standing firm in the face of deceit is both necessary and empowering. The fallout also offered lessons about workplace dynamics. I observed how deception can temporarily succeed when fear, silence, and arrogance are at play, but that transparency, documentation, and courage can restore balance. I realized that ethical vigilance and strategic thinking are not just professional skills, they are essential tools for preserving dignity, integrity, and credibility in any environment. Robert's downfall served as a cautionary tale. While he initially believed that clever manipulation and assertive performance could secure his victory, he had underestimated the combination of evidence, strategy, and resilience. His attempts to dominate and control narratives ultimately led to his discredit. The experience highlighted the fundamental truth that accountability, when pursued diligently, cannot be evaded indefinitely. As the weeks passed, the office gradually returned to a sense of normalcy, though the dynamics were forever changed. Trust, once compromised, had been restored through transparency and recognition of truth. My professional standing had been solidified, not just through the reclamation of credit, but through the demonstration of integrity, resilience, and strategic intelligence. The ordeal had elevated both my credibility and my confidence in navigating complex, high-stakes situations. The act closes with a sense of resolution, justice, and reflection. The confrontation had set in motion a chain of consequences that restored balance, rewarded integrity, and punished deception. Robert's theft was exposed, my work was acknowledged, and the office culture shifted toward accountability and ethical conduct. More importantly, I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient, proof that even in the face of profound betrayal, truth, preparation, and unwavering resolve can prevail. Weeks had passed since the confrontation, the exposure, and the fallout. The office, though never quite the same, had settled into a new rhythm, one shaped by transparency, accountability, and a heightened awareness of ethics. I had reclaimed my work, restored my credibility, and watched as justice, slow but deliberate, took its course. Yet beyond the professional vindication, there was a deeper, more personal journey unfolding within me. One of reflection, self-discovery, and life lessons earned through betrayal and resilience. Sitting at my desk one quiet morning, I allowed myself to step back and view the entirety of the experience. The betrayal, the months of suspicion, the discovery, the meticulous planning, and the confrontation, all of it, formed a tapestry of challenges that had tested every part of me. I realized that, while painful, the ordeal had revealed strengths I hadn't fully recognized: patience in the face of deception, strategic thinking under pressure, emotional resilience, and the courage to stand firmly for integrity and truth. I thought about Robert, his arrogance, his assumption that he could manipulate perception and claim what wasn't his. He had believed that charm, authority, and overconfidence could suppress accountability. But the experience had taught me an invaluable lesson: deceit, no matter how cleverly executed, leaves traces. Every act of betrayal creates evidence, and those traces, when observed with patience and diligence, can be used to restore balance. His downfall wasn't just a personal victory for me. It was a reminder that integrity, though often tested, has a way of prevailing. Reflecting on my own emotions, I recognized the complex interplay between anger, humiliation, and determination. Initially, I had been consumed by rage, the sharp, bitter sting of seeing my efforts stolen and claimed by another. I had felt powerless, humiliated, and frustrated. But over time, those raw emotions were transformed into something constructive. Anger became fuel for strategic planning. Humiliation became a catalyst for preparation. Frustration became a teacher, forcing me to think critically, act methodically, and develop resilience I hadn't known I possessed. The reflection also brought clarity about the nature of trust and boundaries in professional relationships. I had assumed, in part, that colleagues in leadership would inherently recognize merit, that honesty would be sufficient to protect integrity. Betrayal proved that assumptions alone are fragile. Trust must be earned, vigilance must be maintained, and ethical conduct must be paired with evidence and preparedness. The experience reshaped my understanding of workplace dynamics. While collaboration and respect are vital, awareness and careful documentation are essential safeguards. I also reflected on the lessons about patience and timing. Immediate confrontation had been tempting, the desire for instant justice burning brightly in my chest. Yet rushing would have risked undermining the entire effort, potentially casting doubt on my credibility and allowing Robert to manipulate perception further. By exercising patience, observing, gathering irrefutable evidence, and strategizing methodically, I ensured that the exposure was flawless, undeniable, and impactful. The lesson was clear: patience is not passivity, it is power, precision, and preparation in action. Beyond professional strategy, the experience reshaped my understanding of personal strength. True resilience isn't just enduring challenges, it is navigating them with clarity, foresight, and integrity. It's transforming betrayal into opportunity, humiliation into empowerment, and injustice into a catalyst for action. I realized that my value was not determined by others' recognition alone, but by my ability to act ethically, strategically, and courageously, even when others sought to undermine me. The emotional journey also highlighted the importance of self-respect and self-advocacy. Allowing myself to be silenced, overlooked, or manipulated was no longer an option. Speaking up, asserting rightful credit, and defending integrity were not acts of ego, they were acts of self-preservation and justice. I recognize that in any environment where deception exists, silence is complicity, and courage is a necessary tool to reclaim agency and honor. I thought about the broader implications of the experience. Betrayal is a universal human challenge, whether in personal relationships, professional environments, or social interactions. The story of deception, exposure, and justice is not unique to any one person. It is a reflection of human behavior, the dynamics of power, and the consequences of ethical or unethical choices. In navigating these challenges, preparation, vigilance, integrity, and patience become not just professional skill, but essential life lessons. There was also a sense of gratitude embedded within reflection. I was grateful for the clarity that betrayal provided, for the ability to observe patterns of manipulation, and for the strength to act decisively. I was grateful for colleagues who supported me, for leadership that acknowledged the truth, and for the opportunity to demonstrate resilience and strategic thinking. Gratitude, I realized, was not a passive sentiment. It was recognition of the lessons learned, the growth achieved, and the empowerment gained through overcoming adversity. Looking forward, I considered the implications for my future. The experience had not only restored my credibility, but had also reinforced a set of principles that would guide my action as moving forward: vigilance, preparation, documentation, strategic patience, and ethical fortitude. I understood that challenges would arise again. Betrayal, deception, and manipulation are inevitable in any high-stakes environment, but the tools and lessons I had gained would ensure I could navigate them effectively. With integrity and confidence, I also reflected on the human element, the emotions, motivations, and vulnerabilities that drive behavior. Robert's actions had been fueled by arrogance, greed, and overconfidence. My actions had been guided by integrity, diligence, and strategic thinking. Understanding motivations, anticipating reactions, and preparing for consequences became as critical as evidence itself. In many ways, the experience was not just about reclaiming stolen work. It was a study in human behavior, ethics, and strategic problem solving. The final lesson crystallized into a simple yet profound understanding: integrity matters, courage matters, and truth, when pursued methodically and patiently, always has a way of prevailing. Betrayal may wound, manipulation may intimidate, and arrogance may temporarily dominate. But preparation, evidence, and ethical resolve create a foundation that cannot be shaken. Success in reclaiming what was lost was not just measured by professional recognition, but by the growth, resilience, and clarity I had achieved through the struggle. As I concluded my reflections, I felt a sense of closure. The confrontation was over, the fallout had played out, and justice had been served. The workplace was transformed, colleagues had learned lessons in accountability, and my professional and personal growth had been cemented. Yet beyond all external outcomes, the true victory lay in the internal transformation, the cultivation of patience, resilience, courage, and strategic thinking that would guide every challenge I faced in the future. The story closes with gratitude, insight, and empowerment. The betrayal had been painful, the struggle exhausting, but the lessons were invaluable. I had faced deceit, orchestrated justice, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. I had learned that while blood may not always be a shield and colleagues may not always be allies, integrity, preparation, and courage are tools that ensure no betrayal can define, diminish, or destroy the value of one's work. And in that quiet reflection, I understood a truth that extends beyond the workplace. Life will challenge us. Others may attempt to take what is ours, and betrayal is an inevitable part of human experience, but we have the power to respond with strategy, resilience, and unwavering integrity. In standing firm, reclaiming what is rightfully ours, and learning from every challenge, we not only restore justice, we grow into the strength we never knew we had. Thanks for listening to my story. For more heartwarming and real-life experiences, check out our channel and subscribe.